Merry Christmas in July, crafty people! I'm so happy to have you join me. This is Juliana Michaels, and in this video, I'm sharing my third Christmas card as I continue with my Christmas in July series. On this card, I'll be showing how to create this cool background using an embossing folder and stamps, along with a combination of inks. My hope throughout this series is to inspire you as you begin creating your Christmas cards. Whether you get a start on them now or wait until closer to the holiday season, you're sure to learn some great tips and techniques to take your Christmas cards to the next level. If you're interested in using the exact products I've used to create this card, I'll have them linked in the supplies list below, and when you shop through those links, it helps support me, and I really appreciate that so very much. For this card, I'll be working with the Holtz Sizzix Poinsettia embossing folder, which unfortunately has been discontinued, but there are other similar and beautiful embossing folders out there that I'll link to. I'll also be using the Holtz Sizzix Festive Bouquet die set and the Holtz Sizzix Seal Switchlit, which is a combination embossing folder and die all in one. I'll also be using the Waffle Flower Oversized Joy stamp and coordinating die set, and the Holtz Music and Advert stamp set. If you don't have these specific dies and stamps, feel free to take a look at your stash for something similar. To create the background for this card, I'll be using a brayer, gold metallic pigment ink, and white pigment ink. The paper I'll be using is Distress Craft Heavy Stock, along with some colored cardstock for the die cutting. Now let's get on to the making. I'm going to start off with a piece of Distress Craft Heavy Stock cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to place it in my stamping platform and use a bit of temporary adhesive to help hold it in place. I can kind of get the magnets on the corners, but this will help if I need to stamp it more than once. Here I'm inking up the Advert image from the Holtz Music and Advert stamp set with ground espresso archival ink, and I'm using the Stampendable tool to help me get good even pressure. I do end up having to re-stamp it a second time, so I'm glad I made sure the paper wasn't going to move on me. Next, I'm going to place the paper in the embossing folder, and that bit of temporary adhesive on the back side is going to come in handy here as well. Here I'm using a brayer to apply gold metallic pigment ink to the embossing folder. I did try just rubbing the ink pad over the embossing folder, but I found that I got better coverage when I used the brayer. When working with the brayer, you want to roll it across the ink to pick up the ink and then roll that onto the embossing folder. If you push the brayer on either the ink pad or the embossing folder, you are just going to push the ink off. You really only need light pressure and then just roll with it. Once I get the folder covered with the ink, I'm going to close it on the paper and then run it through my die cutting machine. And here is what happens. The ink is transferred onto the paper while the design is embossed into the paper. The effect is subtle on this craft paper, so I'm going to repeat this process for a second time. And here's a comparison with what the paper looked like before and then after the 2 coats of ink. I then repeat the entire process one more time for a total of 3 layers of ink. If you want it even more intense, you could certainly continue adding layers of ink. Now I'm going to add some highlights to the raised area from the embossed design by rubbing a white pigment ink pad over the raised areas. Here I'm applying the paper onto a sticky mat to help hold it flat so that the ink only gets onto the embossed areas. When you're applying the ink, make sure that you lightly rub the ink pad over them. Don't push down. And as you can see, the poinsettias start to pop against the metallic background as they pick up the white ink. The next step is to apply walnut stain distress ink to the edges of the paper. I then use a distress sprayer and spritz the paper with water to activate the ink. I then dry the paper with my heat tool. I repeat this process and even use a paper towel to dab up some of the ink and then dry the paper well with my heat tool. And this is what the completed background looks like. Off camera, I cut and assembled all of the die cuts. For the seal Thinlit, I die cut and embossed it using a piece of heavyweight white cardstock. Here I'm rubbing the gold metallic ink pad lightly over the raised areas, which makes them stand out against the white paper. To help hold it in place, I applied a bit of temporary adhesive to the back side. I then inked the edges with walnut stain distress ink. Next, I take the die cut Joy, which I cut from gold metallic craft stock and twice from heavyweight white cardstock. I adhered those layers together to make the die cut a little more sturdy and add a touch of dimension. I then sanded the gold paper to give it a distressed look and adhered it to the seal using Artise glue. You might notice the tool I'm using. It's a pickup tool that's part of the Sizzix intricate multi-tool set, and it's perfect for helping pick up and place small die cuts. Now I'm going to start working out the placement of the rest of the sentiment and other die cuts. I'm going to start off by trimming some of the holly branches to separate some of the leaves. I then began adhering some of the greenery stems together to place behind the seal, and then continue with adhering the rest of the stems. Once again, the ultrafine precision tip on the Artise glue comes in super handy for adhering those tiny small die cuts. After I finish adhering the greenery, I trim off any ends that are sticking out and then attach the poinsettia using double-sided foam tape. I then add some adhesive to the back side of the seal die cut before adhering it to the card front. As I'm starting to position it, I don't like how far the one greenery piece is sticking up, so I pull it off and reposition it. I then add the sentiment strip, which was stamped and heat embossed with gold embossing powder, and I adhere it using double-sided foam adhesive. The final touch on the card is to add some sparkle. This is how I did it on my last Christmas card. I used the ultra-fine precision tip to apply Artise glue to the edges of the die cut, and then applied rock candy glitter using a glitter duster. While this was drying, I cut a piece of heavyweight white cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches to layer behind the background, and I inked the edges of it with walnut stained distress ink. Once the adhesive and glitter was dry, I applied some clear double-sided tape to the back side of the background paper. I removed one end of the adhesive liner, centered the background paper on the base layer, and then removed the liner from the rest of the adhesive. And with that, the card is complete. I really love the shimmer, shine, interest, and dimension you can achieve by layering the various inks over the stamped and embossed paper. This might just be my new favorite technique, and I'll definitely be using it again very soon. Thanks so much for watching. I'm truly grateful for you. I was wondering if you could do me a quick favor and subscribe to my channel or leave me a thumbs up or a comment. If you're feeling extra generous, I'd love for you to share about my channel with your friends. All of these things help out us YouTubers so much, and it would mean so much to me to have your support.